Michelle thinks American men suck.
Let me warn you, your rage does not exist in a vacuum. If we don't get this election right, your wife, your daughter, your mother, we as women will become collateral damage to your rage. To the women listening, we have every right to demand that the men in our lives do better.
Greg Gutfeld walked into the studio that night full of confidence. He looked like a man who had something bold to say, and he wasn't going to hold back. His focus, Michelle Obama, once known as America's graceful First Lady, now a media figure, with a podcast, best-selling books, a fitness brand, and a very carefully crafted public image. He began by pointing out that even Michelle's biggest fans seemed confused lately. She had made some strange comments, like saying women need to speak out and value themselves more than their partner's anger or disappointment. Gutfeld made fun of that by joking that the sound in the background was Barack Obama running to vote.
We have to use our voices to make these choices clear to the men that we love. Our lives are worth more than their anger and disappointment.
What's that pitter-patter sound I'm hearing in the background? It's the footsteps of Barack running to vote for Trump. So, Kat, they know that they're having a hard time with men.
Right.
Doesn't seem like this is the right strategy.
No.
She basically says that they're
for Trump. Then, he got into the heart of his argument. Michelle Obama, he said, isn't what people think she is. She presents herself as someone who's always overcoming struggles, always rising above when in reality. She's been one of the most famous and powerful women in the world for over 15 years. He criticized her memoir Becoming, saying it was less about inspiration and more about getting rich by talking about how hard life was in a mansion, where people expected her to smile. He said every interview she gives follows the same pattern. She talks about challenges.
even if they run Michelle. According to a new poll, Michelle Obama isn't as strong a Democratic candidate against former President Donald Trump as many Dems would have you believe. In a hypothetical matchup, my favorite kind, Trump wins with 47% of the vote compared to Michelle Obama's 44%. I guess some of the kids whose school lunches she ruined are finally old enough to vote.
And plays the victim, even when her life is far better than the average person's. He pointed out that she constantly says she doesn't want to run for president, but her speeches sound a lot like someone preparing for a campaign. And according to recent polls, even if she did run, she'd likely lose to Trump by a few points. Gutfeld also took aim at the idea that people voted against Hillary Clinton because she was a woman. He said voters are more thoughtful than that. They didn't reject Hillary for being female, but for not speaking to their real concerns. Michelle, he argued, was repeating the same mistake, thinking image and identity alone are enough. Then came the harder jabs. He mocked Michelle for complaining about how hard it was to be first.
Rumors continue to escalate for the Obamas. Hopefully they can settle it like men.
Lady, saying every first lady has pressure, but Michelle turned that into a brand. He called her the queen of branding, not a struggling figure, but someone who built an empire by selling an image of empowerment. Gutfeld said she often talks about feeling like an imposter, but that's hard to believe when she's one of the most praised and protected people in the country. If she's an imposter, he joked, what does that make the rest of us? He kept going. He joked about the Obamas sleeping in separate bedrooms and threw in a tasteless line about Barack's sexuality. He said Michelle is everywhere from podcasts and books to branded products and motivational playlists, and yet, somehow still claims to be misunderstood and under pressure. Real issue, though, wasn't just Michelle. It was what she represents. A larger culture where emotions, buzzwords, and branding matter more than results or truth. He said we're being sold a product, Michelle Obama, as a lifestyle land that most people don't see it. He said the problem isn't just her influence, it's that we've allowed this kind of influence to grow. Politicians used to be judged by action. Now they're treated like celebrities, selling hope and inspiration with perfect lighting and curated playlists.
Maybe so, but her analysis seems a symptom of a greater problem that contributed to her party's loss. It goes back to seeing the group and not the person. I call it IPB, identity politics blindness. They lost not because Hillary was a woman, they lost because all they saw was a woman. Meanwhile, Trump took nothing for granted. Fact is, many voters would have happily voted for a woman, just not that one. Because unlike Trump, she didn't speak to their concerns. She only spoke of her entitlement. She just assumed that she had the vote. And just assuming a woman must vote for a woman seems pretty insulting from a man. Humans are more complex. surprising, and interesting than liberals give them.
Not real change. He even compared her to an iPhone commercial: sleek, appealing, expensive, but when it doesn't work, it's somehow always your fault, not the system's. Gutfeld also brought up her recent podcast, which he said was doing poorly. In it, Michelle shared small personal stories, like how Barack annoys her by being late when they travel. Gutfeld joked that she's not leading a movement, she's running a business. And we're the customers. He ended by saying, Michelle doesn't need to run for office because she already has something more powerful than votes. The power to shape public opinion. He called her the Empress of Optics, someone who influences how people feel more than what they think. That's stronger than politics, he argued, because it's invisible and unquestioned. In his final punch, he said, Michelle isn't your leader, she's your brand manager, and you're not her client, you're the product. The audience laughed and clapped, shocked and entertained by how far Gutfeld went. But behind all the jokes and jabs was a deeper message. That maybe what we see in Michelle Obama isn't real at all. Maybe it's a polished image, designed to keep us comfortable, inspired and distracted, and that was the point. Gutfeld didn't just criticize Michelle Obama. He tried to strip away the shine and expose the machine behind it. Not to be cruel, he claimed, but because someone needed to say it. Transitioning line was meant to get Greg Gutfeld opened his show by talking about how Michelle Obama's new podcast isn't doing well. He said she's not used to being ignored, since she's been the center of attention for so long. According to him, Michelle is used to people caring about everything she says, without having to work very hard for it. Then he brought up her efforts involving young people college programs, outreach, and foundations. He joked that it all sounds like a setup for sequels, like a movie franchise. But he asked the real question, when have any of those programs actually shown results? Instead of outcomes, he said, we just get merchandise, books, candles, speeches. He went on to say that most of Michelle's image is about emotion, good vibes, and speeches with background music, not real change. It feels good, sure, but it doesn't actually fix anything. He compared it to taking a warm bath when your house has broken plumbing, comforting, but useless in the long run. Gutfeld criticized her speeches as full of generic motivational phrases like you are enough or you are powerful. He said that sounds nice, but it doesn't help a small business owner struggling to survive or a parent working 2 jobs. He made fun of a story from Michelle's podcast where she complained that
In the latest installment of What Happened in an Election That Occurred a year and a half ago, Michelle Obama was asked how Trump won, and she laid the blame on Hillary. Just kidding, she blamed sexism from women against women.
In light of this last election, I'm concerned about us as women and how we think. If we're not comfortable with the notion that a woman could be our president, compared to what? You know, we have to have that conversation with ourselves.
Barack is always late. He took the joke further with a harsh jab about Obama's birth and another about bathroom habits. Even he admitted he regretted that one. But then he got serious again. Gutfeld said, this isn't just about Michelle, it's about a bigger issue. In our culture, people now care more about slogans, Instagram posts, and feeling inspired than about real action. He said Michelle helped shape that culture, and it's not helping real people. He pointed out how strange it is that someone living in a mansion, sitting on an expensive couch, with a chef in the next room, is seen as the voice of the voiceless. His point, it's all image, not reality. He compared Michelle Obama to an iPhone. Looks great. Seems progressive. Everyone wants it, but when it fails, we don't blame the system, we blame ourselves. He said she's like Apple politics, shiny, expensive, and protected from real criticism. He also mentioned how Michelle always seems to be complaining about her husband, about America, about her personal struggles, even though she's one of the most privileged women in the world. He pointed to a podcast appearance where she said her biggest fears weren't for herself, but for people out on the streets. Gutfeld's audience burst into laughter, thinking the comment was out of touch. Then came the final moment. Gutfeld said Michelle's
been busy working on a new podcast, and so far, it's been a flop. The first 2 episodes have been up all day and only gotten a few thousand views on YouTube. Half of them are probably primetime producers. But still, Michelle's spilling the family secrets, like how Barry gets on her nerves. Listen.
Barack, he had to adjust to what on time was for me.
Because he was on that island time.
Well, but, I've got this husband who's like, when it's time to leave, it's 3 o'clock, he's getting up and going to the bathroom. And I was like, dude, like 3 o'clock departure means you've done all that, It's like, don't start looking for your glasses, at the 3 o'clock.
Doesn't need to run for office because she already has something more powerful than political power, control over public opinion. She influences how people feel, which is often more powerful than facts or policies. He called her the Empress of Optics, someone who doesn't need votes because she controls the message. Gutfeld finished by saying Michelle's real talent isn't leadership or politics, it's branding. And the audience, we're not her clients. We're her product. The room went quiet for a moment, then erupted in laughter and applause. Gutfeld hadn't just mocked Michelle Obama, he had, in his words, exposed the machine behind her image. Not because he hates her, he claimed, but because someone had to tell the truth behind the carefully crafted brand. And he did it with full force. For public opinion, she influences how people feel, which is often more powerful than facts or policies. He called her the Empress of Optics, someone who doesn't need votes because she controls the message. Gutfeld finished by saying Michelle's real talent isn't leadership or politics, it's branding. And the audience, we're not her clients. We're her product. The room went quiet for a moment, then erupted in laughter and applause. Gutfeld hadn't just mocked Michelle Obama, he had, in his words, exposed the machine behind her image. Not because he hates her, he claimed, but because someone had to tell the truth behind the carefully crafted brand. And he did it with full force.
I'm going to talk to you about Michelle Obama's ongoing midlife meltdown, like her, like as you put it, her Stegosaurus hairdos. The utterance the other day, she says she's transitioning. I mean, I think we both know what she's trying to do by using that word.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you make of all of this? Like, what's going on in that psyche?
I think that transitioning line was meant to get attention because her podcast is failing. No one wants to watch it, and she's not used to that. You know, she's used to being the center of attention. Everyone's interested in me. I don't have to try hard. And so now
Even he admitted he regretted that one. But then he got serious again. Gutfeld said, this isn't just about Michelle, it's about a bigger issue. In our culture, people now care more about slogans, Instagram posts, and feeling inspired than about real action. He said Michelle helped shape that culture, and it's not helping real people. He pointed out how strange it is that someone living in a mansion, sitting on an expensive couch, with a chef in the next room, is seen as the voice of the voiceless. His point, it's all image, not reality. He compared Michelle Obama to an iPhone. Looks great. Seems progressive. Everyone wants it, but when it fails, we don't blame the system, we blame ourselves. He said she's like Apple politics, shiny, expensive, and protected from real criticism. He also mentioned how Michelle always seems to be complaining about her husband, about America, about her personal struggles, even though she's one of the most privileged women in the world. He pointed to a podcast appearance where she said her biggest fears weren't for herself, but for people out on the streets. Gutfeld's audience burst into laughter, thinking the comment was out of touch. Then came the final moment. Gutfeld said Michelle doesn't need to run for office because she already has something more powerful than political power, control over.
Michelle Obama surprised fans on our new podcast by saying her pet peeve about her husband is that he's chronically late. For example, we're still waiting on him to admit he's from Kenya. And as for Barack's pet peeve about Michelle, he's mad that she keeps leaving the toilet seat up. When she cleans it. When she cleans it.
I regret that.
Whoopi Goldberg.
Like a setup for sequels, like a movie franchise. But he asked the real question, when have any of those programs actually shown results? Instead of outcomes, he said, we just get merchandise books, candles, speeches. He went on to say that most of Michelle's image is about emotion, good vibes, and speeches with background music, not real change. It feels good, sure, but it doesn't actually fix anything. He compared it to taking a warm bath when your house has broken plumbing, comforting, but useless in the long run. Gutfeld criticized her speeches as full of generic motivational phrases like you are enough or you are powerful. He said that sounds nice, but it doesn't help a small business owner struggling to survive or a parent working 2 jobs. He made fun of a story from Michelle's podcast where she complained that Barack is always late. He took the joke further with a harsh jab about Obama's birth and another about bathroom habits.
But that hasn't stopped her from giving speeches that sound suspiciously like campaign warm-ups. You know, just in case America gets nostalgic for soaring rhetoric that says absolutely nothing. Tell that to the working parent who doesn't have time to reflect on their power because they're too busy driving for Uber after their night shift. Now it was getting real. Called becoming, as in becoming a billionaire, for talking about how tough it is to live in a mansion when people still expect you to smile at them. Then came the real twist. Have you noticed the pattern? He asked. Every interview is a masterclass in strategic victimhood. Michelle is always overcoming, she's always rising, which is impressive considering she's been on top for like 15 years. The crowd laughed harder this time because of the voiceless when you're speaking from a $12,000 0-cents couch under a halo light with your chef in the next room. Boom. Pin drop. And then he did the unthinkable. He compared Michelle's cultural influence to an iPhone commercial. Looks sleek, sounds progressive, everyone wants one. But the moment it glitches or doesn't deliver, you blame the user, not the system. Michelle Obama is Apple politics. Shiny, expensive, and somehow always immune to criticism. The metaphor was absurd and perfect. She sells empowerment like Starbucks sells identity, he added. Personalized, pleasant, and of course, wildly overpriced.
Other than the wonderful Megyn Kelly in the United States. Now, why is Michelle Obama whinging? She seems to always be whinging. Why are things so hard?
Featuring Michelle Obama. That's like writing your own 5-star Yelp review. Now the gloves were fully off. Gutfeld pulled no punches. She talks about imposter syndrome. While being one of the most celebrated, praised, and protected public figures of our time, lady, if you're an imposter, what chance do the rest of us have? You're everywhere. You're on my Wheaties box, my Spotify algorithm, and somehow even in my dreams.
Michelle Obama has openly admitted that...
Now don't get me wrong, Gutfeld said, feigning innocence like a cat with feathers in its mouth. She's smart, she's charismatic, she's accomplished. But let's not pretend she's some underdog climbing out of the rubble. She's not Rocky Balboa. She's a corporate sponsor Yoda with a stylist. Cue a montage of her speaking tours, branded lunchboxes, and podcast segments where she unironically talks about struggling to find balance while standing in a designer kitchen.
Our latest target, as you will see in this little trailer for tomorrow's bigger piece, is Michelle Obama. Watch.
Oh, man.
A former first lady with her own podcast.
I'm Michelle Obama. People line up for my advice.
No, not her.
Turned podcast guru, turned queen of strategic vagueness with a Nike sponsorship. And Gutfeld, he came in swinging like a caffeinated raccoon with a grudge and a microphone. Let's talk about Michelle, he said, twirling his pen like a dagger. If you are enjoying this breakdown, please make sure to subscribe. Boom! The table was set. Gutfeld kept slicing. Her memoir is called...
That will inspire.
Do you know what having children does to your life? It ruins it.
They mess you up.
What is marriage? It's about misery.
Folks think that this is harsh. It's like you're going to have a bad decade.
We don't articulate our pain.
Yes.
Meet Megan O. Friday on The Megyn Kelly Show.
Because beneath the satire, there was a truth so sharp you could feel it hit. That line, lethal. Gutfeld mimicked her tone, arms wide, voice syrupy. We need to rise above. We need to come together. We need to hope. We need to buy my hardcover edition for $29.99, now available in Target. The crowd roared. Then he zeroed in on her favorite card to play, the martyr card. Michelle loves reminding us how hard it was to live in the White House, he said. How she felt like she had to be perfect, couldn't mess up, couldn't be too black, couldn't be too loud. You know, like every other first lady who had to host dinners and decorate Christmas trees. He paused and added dryly, except none of the others landed a post-White House podcast produced by Barack Obama and...
Such a good time just saying what's obvious about that. Like, Michelle, she should change her name to Misery Obama. That's really what I think of when I... Misery Obama never has a positive word to say. Never. Never. You know, not about children, not about family, certainly not about her husband. By the way, before we leave this topic, here's her latest soundbite that made the rounds. This happened on June 18th, but I was off. Here it is, SOT 39.
You should have threw a boy in the mix.
I would. I'm so glad I didn't have a boy.
She and Barack sleep in separate bedrooms. Here's how it works. She sleeps downstairs and he likes men.
Michelle Obama is the algorithm. He leaned back, deadpan. We used to say Big Brother is watching. Now, Big Michelle is podcasting. And yet, just when you thought he was done, Gutfeld revved up for the grand finale. Michelle's real power isn't her charm, it's her untouchability. She's bullet